Suella Braverman, friend of mine. I think she's a great Home Secretary. I think she's got balls of steel. She's made some comments this week about hate marches on the streets of the UK. Now, the usual lot are saying it's hateful speech from Suella. It's controversial. It's aggressive. I don't think so. I think she's saying what most people in our great country are thinking.
Yeah, I agree. I think Suella Braverman has been absolutely brilliant in terms of her statements here. These marches are hate marches. A lot of the demonstrators taking to the streets are pro-Hamas. Many have issued all kinds of menacing statements. The Home Secretary is absolutely right to condemn these protests. She is right as well to highlight the dangers of multiculturalism, which of course she has attacked on a number of occasions. And we are seeing huge demonstrations on the streets of British cities in support, frankly, of a terrorist organisation, Hamas, brutally murdering over 1,400 Israelis. They've killed a lot of British citizens as well. And these are not peaceful protests. In fact, many of these protesters are issuing all kinds of manner of threats against Jewish people. This kind of hate speech should have no place in British society. Okay. There should be zero tolerance for anti-Semitism.
Okay, Niall, thanks for that. I'm going to go over to my good friend Matthew.
So I think it's undoubtedly true that there are hateful people on these marches, and some of the behaviour has been reprehensible, and some of the slogans used and the attitudes taken. But not everybody who's calling for a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire in Gaza. I want the war to be over as soon as possible. But not everybody on those marches is full of hate. So I think it was an ill-chosen phrase. I mean, on the way here, I walked past the Oxfam shop, and there's a sign in the window calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. I mean, you know, clearly Oxfam's not a supporter of Hamas. So you're getting the usual kind of a peace crowd on the marches as well. But there are some very unpleasant people saying some very unpleasant things.
Isn't it right, Matthew, that doesn't the country at this moment need a strong Home Secretary like Suella to say these things, to get behind the British people, to get behind our police, which is an important thing, because I think some of our police forces at the moment in London and in Manchester have been found wanting.
Well, I think absolutely we need a strong Home Secretary. I know you're going to laugh if I say we've had 13 years of chopping, changing, police numbers going down to a record low, and now going back up somewhat. But the police do need clarity. I mean, I've spoken to a former police officer this week. It's very difficult to police these marches if they're given the sanction to go ahead by the government, because actually dragging people out of the crowd is basically potential to start a riot. So I'm pleased that this weekend we saw the police actually gathering intelligence, putting photos out there, and then finding out who the people were and arresting them the day after the march.
I think, Niall, it's probably. I mean, Matthew makes a fair point. I think it's reasonable to suggest that, you know, thank goodness we've been in power for 13 years. Otherwise, 5 or 6 years ago, we could have had Diane Abbott as the Home Secretary.
Yeah, you can imagine if Jeremy Corbyn was the Prime Minister right now, he would be supporting, of course, all of these pro-Hamas demonstrators, and it would be a totally different picture. But you know, having said that, with a Conservative government in place, and you've got a great Home Secretary with Suella Braverman, you need to see the police taking action, arresting individuals who are making pro-terror statements. They're acting against the law. There should be arrests. There should be prosecutions. In some cases, there should be the deportation of those who are supporting terrorism, if they're dual nationals, for example, and hold foreign passports. And so we need to see a far tougher approach being taken here. And we cannot allow the kind of horrific anti-Semitism that we're seeing on the streets of British cities today. And there should be zero tolerance for that, and a Conservative government should really be enforcing the law 100% and ensuring the police follow the directions of the Home Secretary.
Matthew, we've seen problems I think it was Tuesday night actually in Liverpool Street Station. There was a massive demonstration there, brought the station to a halt, and quite a few, again, pro-Hamas chants, the usual rent-a-mob, the professional protesters. I think the socialist worker was there. We've seen the problems in Manchester as well, where we saw actual police officers ripping down posters of kidnap victims, I think it was.
Yeah, that's appalling.
It's absolutely appalling. What's going on, Matthew?
Well, I mean, the police have got themselves into a mess in certain parts of the country on this. And actually, for example, at Waterloo Station, another big London station, at the weekend, they did issue the commander issued the notice, which means they can stop and search without without due cause, and they managed to disrupt that. So and ensure that that dissipated quickly. So the police, I agree. I think we all agree. We don't want to see anti-Semitism on the streets. We don't want to see pro-Hamas declarations on the streets, which are, after all, illegal. And we need the police to be firm. But, I mean, ultimately, we must protect the right to protest because that's one of our core values. I mean, look, I would say to all the people who are protesting, they're doing their cause a great deal of harm because they're wrapped up with unpleasant people. You and I know, Lee, that any demonstration where the socialist workers placard, you've lost Middle England even before they get to the next line of the placard. So the police need to be firm, and anybody who does want to change course in Gaza needs to think again about how they're doing about it.
Heartbreaking common sense there from Matthew, Niall. Are the Labour Party in a bit of a pickle over this?
Oh, they certainly are, and I think that the reality is that Labour remains a hard left party.
Yeah.
You do have some moderates in some leadership roles, but the reality is that the extremists in the Labour Party are in large numbers, and it is frankly, I think, a frightening vision of Britain's future if you have a hard left government in power who would frankly tolerate all of these protests, these demonstrations. They would do nothing to act against the pro-Hamas sympathisers on the streets of British cities. And the Labour Party is split right down the middle. In many respects, this is still Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party. Keir Starmer may be the leader, but in reality, the Corbyn supporters are still there in large numbers. They're very influential in terms of how Labour is overall responding to this
let
situation.
Matthew come back on that. We know that Matthew's a former Labour advisor. I think he might want to come back on that a little bit. Pro-Hamas?
Absolutely. Look, the only person, nobody in the Labour Party is pro-Hamas. Let's be absolutely clear on that. Andy McDonald...
Jeremy Corbyn's in the Labour Party.
Jeremy Corbyn's not a Labour MP.
He's in the Labour Party.
Well, I think he won't be for very, very long. I'm not absolutely sure his status of whether he's a member of the party or a member... He's certainly not a Labour member of Parliament. Keir's been absolutely firm. He's not going to be standing as a Labour candidate at the next election. Andy McDonald, who was the MP who injudiciously used the from the river to the sea chant this week, has been suspended. So the Corbyn element is no way, it's no new Labour, new danger. There's no reds under the bed, as it were. Now, that's just not true. Keir is absolutely in control of the party, and despite pressure from people who don't support Hamas but do support a ceasefire, that may be naive, we can argue about that, but they're not pro-Hamas. People like Anas Sarwar, who is a total Blairite, Starmerite, whatever you want to call him, is not suddenly a Corbynista who's going to take power, and nor is Andy Burnham or some of the other people who have called for a ceasefire. So it's completely wrong to characterise that as the Corbyn threat is still there. It isn't.
And yet now, we're seeing in cities like Manchester and London, the people responsible for the policing are Labour mayors. Yeah,
exactly. And it's no surprise that you're seeing these huge demonstrations taking place, far left demonstrations under, of course, Labour leadership in London and in Manchester. Sadiq Khan, I think, has been a huge disaster, frankly, in terms of his lack of leadership in London. You do not see Sadiq Khan condemning these protesters. He's taking no action at all. And the weak-kneed police response that we're seeing is in large part due to Sadiq Khan's approach. And this is not the fault of the Home Secretary. It's the fault of the weak leadership you're seeing from the mayor, who's very sympathetic.
I'm getting you. Look, it's time for the yes or no quiz now, guys. So let's crack on with it. Right, it's time for the yes or no quiz with Matthew and with Niall. Look, guys, you know the rules. It's a yes or no.